The room is still dim. Before both feet reach the floor, one hand reaches for the phone. A bright screen opens, and with it come alerts, messages, schedules, headlines, and somebody else's urgency. Nothing terrible has happened in those first 2 minutes, yet the mind is already answering pressures it did not choose. One message creates concern. One reminder tightens the chest. One unfinished matter begins arguing its case. The day has started speaking, and attention has quietly agreed to listen. Now picture the same waking, the same responsibilities, the same phone within reach. But this person pauses, not for an hour, and not because there is nothing demanding an answer. The pause may be only 2 minutes. Scripture is opened and read slowly enough for one clear truth to stand up in the mind. That truth is held before the calendar is open. Circumstances have not changed, but the standpoint has. The first person meets the day from whatever the day supplied. The second begins with a governing thought by which the day can be answered. You see, this is not a contest between owning a phone and rejecting technology. The phone is not the problem, and usefulness is not the enemy. The question is simpler and more searching. Are you receiving the day passively, or are you choosing what will govern your first response? Many sincere believers live inside that tension. They value Scripture. They intend to give it attention. But the alarm sounds, the schedule presses, anxiety starts rehearsing, and notifications speak before truth is allowed a sentence. There is no need for condemnation here. There is, however, a need for recognition. What receives your first attention often begins forming your first interpretation, and your first interpretation begins shaping your next response. So hold this proposition before we go any farther. Before circumstances demand an answer, establish the Word as the standard by which the day will be answered. That does not mean the first voice you hear will control every event. It does not mean an easy morning purchases an easy day. Trouble may still arrive. Plans may still change. People may still be difficult. But Scripture can prepare you to meet the actual day from a settled point of reference instead of letting each new pressure invent your posture. We are going to make this practical through 6 movements. Read, meditate, speak, plan, act, and review. Read until one truth is understood. Meditate until it becomes personally owned. Speak honest agreement with it. Plan one decision that corresponds to it. Act where responsibility is yours. Then review the response so you can learn and return. And because mornings are not always orderly, we will also make room for the interrupted day. There will be a shortened form for travel, illness, caregiving, oversleeping, and urgent responsibility. And there will be a guilt-free way to resume when consistency breaks. But first we must settle the underlying question, what does it really mean to give Scripture the first say? And just as importantly, what does it not mean? To give Scripture the first say is to place it first in authority. It becomes the measure of what you permit your mind to rehearse, what you are willing to say, and how you choose to conduct yourself. It is not a charm laid over the schedule. It is not a spiritual covering placed on the morning so that inconvenience must keep its distance. The Word governs your response. The routine does not govern circumstances. Now there are 2 incomplete positions here, and both can sound reasonable at first. One person says, I already believe inwardly, so I do not need a morning practice. Certainly, faith is not produced by arranging a notebook and a clock, but inward agreement that never directs attention, corrects language, or reaches conduct remains unused at the very place it was meant to operate. If what you believe never enters the way you answer pressure, what practical authority has it exercised? The other position goes to the opposite extreme. It treats the precise hour, the exact wording, or the completed sequence as leverage. If every sentence is said correctly, then the meeting must go well, the plan must succeed, and other people must respond favorably. But that is no longer alignment. It is an implied bargain. It assigns power to the mechanics and then measures faith by whether events cooperate. Friends, a disciplined morning may prepare you for uncertainty, but it does not remove uncertainty. It may steady you in difficulty, but it does not earn exemption from difficulty. The balanced position is both more serious and more freeing. You establish a repeatable practice because your attention needs direction, your language needs truth, your plans need examination, and your behavior needs a standard. You are not trying to make the day submit to your routine. You are bringing yourself under a truth you have received. That is spiritual ownership, not sovereignty over every circumstance, every person, or every result, but responsibility for the response that belongs to you. Believers often describe this desire as being word-led. That familiar language supports one narrow and useful point. Faith is meant to be applied under the direction of Scripture. It does not prove that every desired outcome is promised, and it does not make every personal interpretation correct, so we remain teachable. We do not use spiritual language to claim authority over matters that are not ours. We use it to accept responsibility where obedience has become clear. Remember the chain, because we will return to it. Receive the word, hold it in attention, put it into honest speech, translate it into a decision, and obey what has become clear. Receive, hold, speak, decide, obey. The strength is not in reciting the chain as though the words themselves compel results. Its value is that truth is carried from the page into the person and from the person into the next faithful response. So first does not mean magical, it means governing. It means Scripture is allowed to correct you before you attempt to use it to explain everything around you. And now that the purpose and limits are clear, we can begin the actual practice at its source. Before you can meditate, confess, plan, or act, you must first receive a passage and receive it well enough to understand what it is saying. Now we begin with the first observable movement, read. Why must reading come before speaking? Because confession is meant to answer what Scripture has actually said. If we begin with the result we want and then gather religious-sounding phrases to support it, we have reversed the order. We are asking the text to serve our desire instead of allowing the text to direct our faith. Speech and action become grounded when they begin with truth that has been received and understood. This does not require covering several chapters before breakfast. A short passage may be enough. If you follow an established reading plan, take the portion assigned and give a smaller part of it your full attention. The aim is not maximum volume. The aim is sufficient attention. It is better to carry one truth you understand than to hurry across many pages and retain only the satisfaction of having finished them. As you read, ask 3 questions. First, what does the text say? Stay with what is actually present before adding what you hope it means. Second, what does it reveal about my present responsibility? Not another person's failure, not an outcome I cannot command, but the response that belongs to me. Third, what word, contrast, command, assurance, or principle deserves to be carried into today? Those questions keep reading simple, but they do not make it shallow. They train attention to receive before it attempts to apply. Suppose a person reads a short portion and notices several possible themes. The hurried impulse says, collect all of them. Make a complete lesson. Do not leave anything behind. But this morning is not an examination, and you are not trying to prove how much you can gather. So the reader slows down, chooses the clearest point, and records one plain sentence in a notebook or phone note. Today I am responsible to answer pressure with patience. That sentence is not presented as a quotation from the passage. It is a careful statement of the responsibility the reader understood from it. Now notice what has happened. The reader did not hunt for a prediction about the schedule. The passage did not have to reveal whether the conversation would be pleasant, whether the plan would work or whether inconvenience would appear. Scripture may govern your response without describing the events you will meet. Do not force every passage to become a forecast. Let a command command, let an assurance assure, let a contrast expose, and let a principle direct. The question is not always what will happen to me today. Often the better question is, how am I called to respond today? This is one reason believers have found word-led language useful. It emphasizes that faith application should begin with Scripture rather than personal preference. But remember the boundary already established. Familiarity does not prove an interpretation, and popularity does not turn a phrase into theological authority. The text must lead. Our favored language must remain teachable. So read until one truth becomes clear enough to state plainly and carry deliberately. Do not measure the morning by pages completed. Measure this first movement by understanding. Can you say what you receive without exaggerating it, bending it toward a desired result, or hiding behind vague religious language? If you can, reading has done its work. But identification is only the beginning. A sentence noticed briefly can disappear as quickly as it arrived. Before that truth can become honest speech and corresponding action, it must remain before the mind long enough to confront the thought that would ordinarily take its place. That is the next movement, not merely reading the truth, but holding it. Take the governing sentence you have received and keep it before you. That is meditation in practical terms. You return your attention to the truth, examine what it means, and compare it with the thought presently competing for control. You are not trying to discover something mysterious. You are giving understood truth enough attention to correct an established reaction before that reaction becomes speech and conduct. A well-rehearsed response does not usually announce itself as a decision. It appears as the obvious way to think. Pressure arises, and the mind begins preparing resentment, fear, haste, or self-protection. If the truth passes through attention only once, the older pattern may continue unchallenged. Meditation slows that transfer. It asks, what am I already rehearsing? And does that rehearsal agree with what I have received? Use this four-part sequence. First, repeat the governing sentence silently, not rapidly, and not as though repetition creates power, but slowly enough to hear its meaning. Second, restate it in ordinary language. If you cannot explain it without borrowed phrases, remain with it until you can. Third, identify where today's pressure contradicts it. Where is your mind preparing a response that moves in another direction? Fourth, ask what response would agree with the truth. Repeat, restate, identify, and ask. Those four movements turn meditation from a vague religious idea into careful attention. Suppose you anticipate a difficult email. Before it even arrives, you have begun composing a defensive reply. You imagine the accusation, prepare the correction, and sharpen sentences intended to protect your position. Then you return to the truth chosen that morning. You restate it plainly and notice the contradiction. The truth calls you toward patience, but your mind is rehearsing retaliation. Now the issue becomes visible. Meditation does not tell you that the email will be harmless or that the sender will be reasonable. It does not require you to surrender a necessary boundary. It asks you to examine what belongs to you. Should you answer immediately while irritated? Is the intended tone designed to clarify or to wound? Can the reply be truthful without being punishing? The governing truth has not controlled the other person. It has exposed your responsibility concerning the timing and tone of your response. You see, meditation is neither mental blankness nor anxious repetition designed to produce certainty. Emptying the mind is not the purpose, and repeating a sentence until you feel guaranteed a favorable result is not the purpose. Meditation is sustained attention. It makes contradiction visible, and then it makes responsibility visible. So name the competing thought honestly. Perhaps it is fear of failure. Perhaps it is resentment, haste, helplessness, or the need to control another person. Do not pretend the emotion is absent, and do not shame yourself for noticing it. An unacknowledged thought can direct conduct from concealment. A named thought can be brought into comparison with truth. Before you move on, write one contrast. On one side, record the thought that arrived automatically. On the other, record the truth you have chosen to carry. Keep both statements plain. My first impulse says, and the truth directs me to. Now you can see the conflict before you act it out. That is when meditation has done its work. The Word has been held long enough to correct the thought before the thought becomes your voice. And once the difference is clear, you are ready to speak, not to manufacture reality, but to declare honest agreement with the truth that will govern your response. Use the contrast meditation has uncovered as the material for confession. Here, confession means spoken agreement with the truth you have understood. It is not a collection of impressive phrases that sound spiritual but remain detached from meaning. If you do not know what you are agreeing with, speech becomes performance. But when the truth is clear, speaking gives that truth deliberate expression. Use 3 lines. First, state the governing truth in plain language. Patience is the response required of me under pressure. Second, acknowledge what that truth calls for today. Today I will need patience when I feel rushed or opposed. Third, declare your willingness to act accordingly. I am willing to slow my response, listen carefully, and answer without hostility. Truth, present responsibility, corresponding willingness. That is a confession you can mean. Now notice what those lines do not say. They do not say every conversation will become pleasant. They do not require every decision to be approved or every conflict to disappear. You may affirm courage without announcing that the diagnosis must be favorable. You may affirm faithfulness without declaring that the transaction must succeed. You may agree to walk in patience without predicting that another person will become reasonable. Confession governs the speaker's agreement and conduct. It is not permission to assign outcomes Scripture has not promised. Someone may object, but if I qualify my words that carefully, am I weakening faith? No. Refusing to invent a promise is not unbelief. It is disciplined agreement with what you have actually received. Faith does not become stronger when desire is presented as certainty. It becomes less accountable because no distinction remains between what the Word is shown and what the speaker wants. The truth of the matter is that honest confession can be bold precisely because it is grounded. You can say, I will not let fear choose my response, while admitting that fear is present. You can say, I will act faithfully in what belongs to me, while acknowledging that results do not belong entirely to you. That is not timid language. It is confidence with boundaries, and confidence with boundaries can enter conduct. Neither volume nor emotional intensity gives the declaration its authority. Saying it louder may awaken your attention, but loudness does not compel events. Repeating it may strengthen memory and resolve, but no repetition count turns words into leverage. Speaking at a certain minute may support a useful discipline, but the clock does not confer power. Repeat the confession when repetition helps you understand it, remember it, or remain willing to obey it. Stop treating repetition as though one additional recital forces reality to cooperate. Test every declaration with 2 questions. First, can I trace this statement to the governing truth? If you cannot, revise it until you can speak without exaggeration. Second, what action will demonstrate that I mean it? If no conduct can be named, the declaration may still be too vague. Confession is strongest when you can mean the words and identify the obedience they require. Remember the progression. The word is read until understood. It is held in thought until contradiction is exposed. It is spoken in agreement until responsibility is plainly accepted. Then it must be carried into a decision. Reading receives the truth. Meditation personalizes it. Confession gives it voice. Decision gives it direction. So speak honestly and speak firmly. Do not use words to escape uncertainty. Use them to accept the response that truth requires. But a spoken commitment remains incomplete while it floats above the actual day. Where will patience be needed? When will courage be tested? Which choice will show that your declaration was sincere? The next movement is to give that confession an address in your calendar, your conversation, or your next decision. Now take the responsibility named in your confession and ask a question that will not permit it to remain general. If this is true for me today, where should it alter my schedule, my tone, my boundary, my preparation, or my conversation? Do not ask merely where you hope to feel different. Ask where your choice should become different. Here is a compact way to plan it. When this known pressure appears, I will take this specific response because it agrees with the truth I am carrying. There is the pressure, the response, and the reason. When identifies the point of testing, I will accepts responsibility. Because connects the decision to the governing truth. You are not planning the outcome, you are planning the conduct that belongs to you. Suppose the known pressure is a difficult message waiting at work. Your plan may be this: when I am ready to open that email, I will pause, reread my governing sentence, and prepare an answer without accusation, because patience must govern my response. Then make the plan observable. Open the message only after the pause. Draft the answer without punishing language. If emotion remains high, wait briefly before sending. You may still need to disagree, correct an error, or establish a boundary. Patience does not require passivity. It requires that haste and hostility do not make those decisions for you. The same principle belongs inside the household. Perhaps the predictable pressure is a hurried breakfast or a child resisting an instruction. Plan before the moment arrives. When resistance meets my hurry, I will lower my voice, give one clear instruction, and refuse to let haste determine the emotional climate, because I am responsible for patience under pressure. The child's response is not yours to guarantee. The pace may remain inconvenient, but your tone, clarity, and next action are within the area of your responsibility. These examples include work, family emotion, and ordinary habit, because governing truth must reach the places where conduct is repeatedly formed. They illustrate possible applications. They are not evidence that one plan guarantees transformation, cooperation, or a peaceful result. The plan prepares a faithful response. It does not promise control over everyone involved. Now, choose one corresponding plan, not 7. Not a complete spiritual redesign of every hour. Busy believers often abandon a useful practice because they make it too large to carry. One truth, one known pressure, one chosen response. Simplicity does not make obedience insignificant. It makes obedience identifiable. There are 2 errors to avoid. The first is over-planning. A minute-by-minute schedule covered with spiritual language can become burdensome, and soon the person is serving the system instead of using the system to support faithfulness. The second is vagueness. I will be more loving today may be sincere, but where will love govern a decision? I will have peace may sound strong, but what will you do when agitation rises? If no pressure point and no response can be named, the intention remains abstract. So write one sentence and place it where you will encounter it before the expected moment. Let it identify a time, a pressure, and a response you can actually choose. That is the 4th movement. Not trying to control the day, but preparing yourself to answer one part of it faithfully. The plan is now located obedience, but a plan is still an intention made in advance. When the message opens, when resistance begins, when emotion rises, old momentum will argue for the familiar response. At that point, you must do more than remember what you planned. You must take the first corresponding step. Now the planned moment arrives. The pressure is no longer an idea written in advance. It is present, and it is asking for a response. Corresponding action means the next honest behavior that agrees with the truth you understood. It does not mean a dramatic gesture, and it does not mean doing something calculated to force another person to change. It is the part that belongs to you, performed because obedience has become clear. Do not be surprised if anxiety, irritation, or reluctance arrives with the moment. Some believers assume that a successful morning practice should remove the difficult feeling before action is required. But preparation does not always make obedience comfortable. It makes obedience identifiable. You may still feel the pull of the old response while choosing a different one. Courage is not proved by the absence of reluctance. It is expressed when reluctance is present and does not make the decision. Return to the difficult email. Patience is not made visible merely because you said that patience would govern you today. It becomes visible when you notice the sentence written to accuse, delete it, and replace it with language you can own after the emotion settles. It becomes visible when you ask the necessary question plainly instead of hiding punishment inside the wording. Then you read the message once more and send only what is truthful, clear, and free from the hostility you had already identified. Will that guarantee a gracious reply? No. The answer may remain unfair. The disagreement may continue. But another person's reaction does not determine whether your response agreed with the truth. You can choose obedience while the consequence remains uncertain. The corresponding action may be smaller than you expected. Make the call you have delayed. Apologize without attaching a defense to every sentence. Prepare before the meeting instead of hoping confidence will appear when it begins. Keep the boundary you promised to keep calmly and without using it to punish anyone. Begin the neglected task and give it 10 focus minutes. These are not attempts to master the whole day. They are honest acts within the responsibility already recognized. Now ask yourself directly, what are you waiting for? Are you waiting to feel willing before doing what has become clear? Are you waiting for another person to improve first? Are you waiting for a perfect opening that requires no courage and carries no risk of misunderstanding? If so, responsibility has quietly been transferred away from your own decision. You cannot choose another person's readiness, and you cannot arrange a moment in which faithfulness costs nothing. But you can perform the next clear act. You see, the smallest completed act gathers the morning movements into one visible response. Reading supplied the truth. Meditation uncovered the competing impulse. Speech declared agreement. Planning identified the decision. Action now gives that agreement form in the material day. Receive, hold, speak, decide, obey. The chain has reached conduct. This is the fifth movement, and it is where the morning rule becomes practical. Not when the words sound strongest, not when emotion feels most settled, and not when circumstances provide reassurance. It becomes practical when known truth produces the next fitting behavior within your responsibility. Then release the result. Faithfulness may bring an immediate change, or its consequence may be slow. The outcome may differ from what you hoped. Prompt obedience is not a method for guaranteeing the aftermath. It is the refusal to postpone your part until the aftermath feels safe. But the day will not stop after one decision. New pressures will appear, attention will scatter, and the morning sentence may seem distant. You will not need to repeat the entire practice every hour. You will need a brief way to retrieve the truth before the next pressure becomes the next response. After the first corresponding action, ordinary demands crowd back in. Another problem appears. Attention moves elsewhere. By noon, the sentence that seemed clear in the morning may no longer feel close. Do not conclude that the practice failed. You were never required to maintain unbroken devotional concentration through every task and conversation. Steadiness is not the absence of drift. Steadiness is the learned ability to return before drift becomes the next decision. Use this brief reset. Stop for one breath. Retrieve the governing sentence. Name the pressure presently before you. Choose the next response that agrees with the truth. Stop, retrieve, name, choose. The whole practice can take 10 seconds because you are not beginning the morning again. You are recalling what you already understood and placing the present moment under its direction. Suppose the sentence concerned patience, but the afternoon has accumulated delays, criticism, and unfinished work. Before carrying that frustration into the next responsibility, pause, take one breath, recall the sentence in ordinary language, name the present pressure honestly. I am tense, and I am about to answer my family as though they caused this strain. Then choose the next agreeing response. I will enter quietly, listen before complaining, and speak without making this household pay for my workday. That return may happen while traveling home or with your hand on the door. Nothing theatrical is required. Circumstances have not changed in those few seconds. The workload may still be heavy and the irritation may still be felt, but the pressure has been identified before it becomes somebody else's burden. Truth has been recalled before frustration selects the tone. Attach these returns to natural transitions. Pause before opening a group of messages, before beginning a meeting, before eating lunch, before entering the home, or while moving from professional duties into family responsibilities. These are not sacred alarms, and no particular cue carries power. They are ordinary reminders placed where one kind of demand gives way to another. The cue simply helps you remember that a new response is about to be required. Now, perhaps you meant to pause and forgot. You opened the messages, entered the room, or began the conversation before remembering. Has the day been spoiled? Certainly not. Return at the next remembered moment. Do not punish yourself with extra declarations, and do not try to compensate by repeating the morning sequence with greater intensity. That turns recovery into payment, as though a missed cue created a debt. It did not. The moment you notice the drift is the moment return becomes available. You see, the purpose is not to protect a perfect record of remembrance. It is to recover direction. One return may alter the next sentence. Another may correct the next choice. A later return may lead you to repair what was spoken too quickly. The important matter is that forgetfulness does not receive permanent authority merely because it operated for a while. This is how one governing truth remains usable through a changing day. The latest circumstance does not have to dictate the next reaction simply because it arrived most recently. Scripture is given another opportunity to answer the moment through your attention, your speech, and your conduct. But brief returns tell you what to do while the day is unfolding. At the end of the day, another question remains. How will you look back honestly without grading faith by pleasant outcomes or condemning yourself for every lapse? That is the work of review. Now look back on the day that began with one governing truth. Review is the sixth movement, but it is not a verdict declaring whether the day was good enough or whether your words worked. It is a brief examination of alignment. The first 5 movements carried truth toward conduct. Review looks at that conduct, learns from it, and prepares the next return. Ask 4 questions. What truth did I carry? Where did I remember it? Where did I react from the old thought? What one adjustment will make tomorrow's response clearer? Keep the questions plain. You are not conducting a trial against yourself. You are identifying what became practical, what was forgotten, and what can be prepared more carefully. Suppose you carried patience, remembered it once, and later spoke from irritation. Give thanks for the return you did make. Then acknowledge the reaction you missed. Do not turn one remembered response into self-congratulation, and do not turn one lapse into condemnation. Gratitude says, I was helped to remember and I acted on what I knew. Honesty says, here I allowed the older response to govern me. Correction then asks whether repair is needed and what adjustment belongs to tomorrow. You can evaluate your attention, your speech, your planning, and your conduct. You cannot use another person's behavior as the grade on your faith. Perhaps you answered carefully and the other person remained harsh. Perhaps you prepared faithfully and an uncontrollable event changed the result. Review what belonged to you. Did you listen? Did you speak truthfully? Did you follow the plan you made? Did you take the corresponding action? The outcome may teach you something, but it does not prove that faith succeeded or failed merely because circumstances were pleasant or painful. Bring ordinary habits and family life friction into this review, because these are places where responses repeatedly become visible. But do not claim that reviewing them establishes some special spiritual efficacy. The purpose is narrower and more practical, to notice where truth entered conduct and where another response needs to be learned. What if the morning itself was missed? Begin at the next available moment. Read one small portion. Retain one clear sentence. Speak one honest commitment. Take one corresponding action. That is the shortest viable form. Do not wait until tomorrow merely because the ideal hour has passed. A late beginning can still direct the next response. There are then two sustainable forms. When time permits, use the fuller practice. Read until one truth is understood. Hold it until the competing thought is exposed. Speak agreement, plan one decision, act on it, and review the response. When travel, illness, caregiving, oversleeping, or urgent responsibility compresses the morning, shorten the duration without abandoning the order. Read briefly, retain the truth, speak your commitment, identify the next fitting action, take it and review when you can. The form may contract. The movement from truth to conduct remains. And do not make a superstition out of a streak. Consistency has value because repeated practice trains attention, return, and conduct. But an unbroken count does not earn protection, certainty, or favorable circumstances. Missing one morning does not erase what has been learned, and completing many mornings does not place life under your control. A streak may record repetition. It cannot measure the heart's entire faithfulness. So review, adjust, and begin again. A lasting practice grows through truthful examination and prompt return, not flawless performance. Tonight's review is not the closing argument against yesterday. It is preparation for tomorrow. And now that all 6 movements are clear, they can be gathered into one complete rehearsal before the next morning begins. Tomorrow will begin with the same 2 first minutes, but they need not begin in the same direction. Alerts may be waiting. Responsibilities may already be pressing. Yet now you know what to do before those pressures begin assigning your reactions. Give Scripture the first governing say, not because the first minutes control every event, but because received truth can establish the standpoint from which you answer those events. Remember the rule. Read until one truth is clear. Meditate until the thought competing with that truth is exposed. Speak honest agreement with what you understand. Plan one corresponding decision within your responsibility. Act when the pressure arrives. Review the response, make the needed correction, and return without condemnation. Now, rehearse it as one continuous practice. You read a manageable portion and identify its governing truth in plain language. You consider the day ahead and name the pressure most likely to oppose it. You acknowledge your first impulse without hiding or excusing it. Then you speak your agreement. This truth applies to me, this pressure will require a response, and I am willing to choose conduct that agrees with what I have received. Next, give that willingness a time and place. Decide where the truth should affect your tone, preparation, restraint, courage, or follow-through. Schedule the first corresponding action as specifically as the day permits. When that moment comes, take the action even if the feeling has not become easy. Then, before the day closes, ask, Where did this truth enter my conduct? Where did I lose sight of it? And what adjustment will help me return sooner tomorrow? That is the whole movement. Receive, hold, speak, decide, act, review, and return. The review is counted as the sixth movement because returning belongs within it. You are not merely looking backward. You are learning how to begin again. Now keep the boundary clear. This rule prepares faithful responses. It is not a contract for painless circumstances. It does not guarantee favorable treatment, healing, financial results, successful plans, or control of other people. It does not make confession empty or weak to say so. Honest agreement is strong because it refuses to claim what has not been promised while accepting what has been made clear. You may not control what tomorrow brings, but you can accept responsibility for how received truth is given expression in your next response. Make one preparation tonight. Put your reading source and notebook where you will see them before you see your phone. Choose a realistic starting time and protect only the minutes actually available. Do not promise an hour when you can faithfully give 10 minutes. And if the morning is interrupted, use the shorter form, read briefly, retain one truth, speak one commitment, choose one fitting action, and review later. If you miss the beginning altogether, resume at the next available moment. No repayment is required. For 7 mornings, treat this as a study exercise, not a mystical challenge. Each day, record 3 things: the governing truth, the planned action, and one observation from review. At the end of 7 mornings, notice what was realistically sustainable. Adjust the time, the amount of reading, or the placement of your reminder. Preserve the order, but let the routine become honest enough to continue. You need not wake as a passive receiver of anxiety. You can receive the word before the day presses for an answer. You can hold it in thought, speak it with integrity, place it inside a decision, and express it through conduct. And whenever attention drifts, you can return. Before tomorrow speaks, prepare to listen. Then give the truth you receive its next faithful response.